Next up, we have a panel on how diversity drives growth in the Arab world, and I would like to welcome the moderator to the stage, Masuda Sultan, and she's the Chief Executive Officer of Symbio Services. So please welcome Masuda and her panelists to the stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Masuda Sultan, and I'm delighted to be moderating this panel discussion today on how diversity drives growth in the Arab world. A little bit about myself. I'm an American entrepreneur of Afghan origin, and I'm proud to call the UAE my second home and be invested here. We know from the UN and other research that companies which rank higher our gender diversity, especially at the top, tend to perform better and are more profitable. We also see that countries that increase women's employment get better economic growth. In the GCC region alone, bringing each country up to the best regional standard for women's workforce participation would add $180 billion, or 7%, to the economy by 2025. And full parity would bring that figure to $830 billion, 32%. The Middle East has traditionally been behind other regions in the world in terms of the gender gap, but that's changing, with countries like the UAE leading the way in this very exciting time. And today we'll be speaking with some leading women and men in the region who have quite a bit of experience to share on this subject. I'm going to have them introduce themselves, starting with Raya.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you to the organizers and SALT. My name is Raya. I'm Dutch Iraqi. I've been practicing here as a corporate lawyer for the past 12 years. I'm passionate about women economic empowerment. I founded the Women Lawyers Association for the Middle East.
I'm Ellecia Saffron, and I'm the Managing Director of Maysaffron. We help companies and funds raise capital and connect with the Middle East and Asia. I'm a former fund manager, and I'm also the Vice Chair of 100 Women in Finance, which is an international organization, non-for-profit, that has 17,000 members globally. I'm the Vice Chair of the Middle East chapter.
I'm Nabyl Maskari. I have the privilege to act as the Chief Executive Officer of a matriarchal-owned family office based in Abu Dhabi. We're a diversified conglomerate originally in oil and gas, and today extending across ICT, defense, and financial services.
Hello, my name is Shema Fawaz. I'm the founder and CEO of Gossip, the brand. I'm an Emirati entrepreneur, and this is a company that I founded 3 to 4 years ago. We specialize in events, F&B, brand marketing within the UAE GCC, and we've actually expanded into London now.
That's wonderful. So let me start by asking you the first question then. Shema, the UAE is leading in the region in terms of gender equality. What is it about this country that makes it different? What makes it stand out?
Well, since inception, UAE has been a champion of women empowerment and equality. Our late founding father, Sheikh Zayed Al Nahyan, actually started this mission, and he always saw that women were half of society and they should be empowered through education and through the workforce. From the beginning, my mom was one of the founding members of UAE, and I remember we'd go with her to houses and she'd have to convince Emirati parents to let Emirati kids go to college or go to school. It wasn't, for the country, it was a bit of a taboo at the time, but for the leaders, they had a clear vision, and the vision was women empowerment. Women have to be part of society, they have to be educated, and work is something we're proud of. And this vision has translated to today. His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, who's the Prime Minister and Vice President of UAE, has ensured that at least there has to be one woman on every board, and companies, as you said, that have females on the boards actually do perform better. He actually established the Gender Balance Council that is headed by his daughter, Sheikh Manal bin Rashid Al Maktoum, and there's been many strides through the Gender Balance Council to position UAE as one of the leading countries within the Gender Balance Index. Currently, we have equal pay. This was announced in 2018. So wages between women and men are equal. We also have, there's a new maternity leave that's extended to 3 months from 1 month. in my personal experience, I was ex-Mubadala. I used to be in government, and now I'm in the private sector, and my most champions for my success have been men. From my father, to my bosses, to my colleagues, to family, friends, to anyone within the business sector. I've never heard a man come and say, not for you, don't do this. I've always found men, and specifically Emirati men, to be very supportive, to help you with your businesses, to give you advice, to connect you with the right people. And I have to say I'm very proud as an Emirati, because this is part of our culture, where I never felt an equality between male and female. In fact, I found it to be an advantage to be a woman, because everyone out there is actually on your side to succeed.
And Nabyl, your mother was one of the first entrepreneurs in this country. I believe she got the first construction license as a woman-owned company.
I think it's interesting, and we were just catching up in the green room, and in fact, our mothers know each other, and from these early days, if you think about how far many people think we've come, but in fact, I think the values of gender inclusion, and especially women empowerment, were always foundational elements of this country, whether it was at its foundation or it is today. In my mother's case, I think the answer to a lot of what you would say women have achieved are largely driven by education. And if you would ask her, the most important thing that this country has done, going back to Dr. Shaima's discussion, is really encouraging women to participate in education. My mother is well known among the community as being really the pioneering sort of woman engineer and PhD holder and geophysicist. She did that because it, for her, was the way within which she could most contribute back to her country and to her society. Now, if you fast forward, today looking at women in the UAE, more than 70% around of the graduates of our universities are women. This is an amazing accomplishment in terms of the participation within the education system. And that translates also into economic outcomes. So there was a fantastic conference in Sharjah yesterday, and some of the figures they shared, around 10% of the total national economy of the UAE is actually driven by women-owned enterprise, right? Globally, it's about 1%. So we are 10x our global peer group when it comes to how women are contributing to society. And I think that has a lot to do with women in education and pursuing the career. And I have to say to my colleague, this is a perfect example, right? I mean, you're sitting with a PhD who served within the private sector, but also took her early career of working within the public. And I think that's a unique story that you can do in the UAE, is working both for your government and then helping by diversifying into the private sector and creating jobs, and actually giving back through impact. So I applaud you. Fantastic story. Thank you.
Inspiring indeed. Shaima, you mentioned that women that have, companies that have women in the leading management tend to do better. And Ellecia, you've actually studied diversity in leading Australian companies and the link between financial performance and diversity. So I'm wondering what you discovered from your study that's relevant to this region.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start by saying that I think someone once said to me, diversity, it's that dish that looks really good that's served to you, that you take a bite and it tastes really awful. And that's the truth about diversity. It's really important, and but it creates conflict and it creates a lot of discomfort. But at the end of the day, in strategic groups that need to make decisions and strategize, the more depth you have in the minds that come together and experience, the better the result and the thoughts that are going to be the result of that discussion and brainstorming session. So I was working at ADIA. I was one of the only female fund manager at the time. And it was about 11 years ago, and the Nordics at the time were talking a lot about bringing in quotas, and I thought, oh my goodness, I'm so hardworking, and I'm an ambitious woman, and if they bring in quotas, any position I ever have is always going to be put down to because I'm a woman. This is such a bad idea, but maybe I'll study it to see if this diversity thing actually does make a difference. So I did, for my dissertation, a study of 200 of the largest listed Australian companies, and I measured them as a fund manager on their financial performance over an extended period, and I measured the diversity in the boards and the upper management echelons. And there was quite a few things that I learned from it, but the key thing that I want to reiterate today is that those groups that had above average female representation, which was the diversity factor in this study, they outperformed. Those that had one didn't. In fact, those that had one underperformed in some cases, even more than companies that had none. And that's for a couple of reasons. Tokenism, it can be reflective of culture. But one other study I read during that time that helped me to understand why is when you have a minority, only one represented in any situation, the rest of the group has trouble hearing them and listening to what they have to say. Whereas when you have more than one, the actual substance or content of what they're talking about is listened to and processed.
That's interesting. So, Ellecia, where are the opportunities in terms of industries in this region where you see diversity actually driving growth and creating these companies that are more profitable and better managed? What are the kinds of industries that you can see this in?
Where are industries successfully being diverse? I think what we're seeing across the board, across the world, is this emergence of women into the workplace. That's moving successfully. Where we're not seeing it transpire is in these upper roles, so either on boards or in executive teams. It's not going through. For me, in my industry, I'm a former fund manager. And I don't know if anyone saw the front page of the Financial Times in 2015 when the title said, female fund manager, an endangered species. But yeah, the rate of female fund managers has been in decline since 2007 and continues to decline. So yeah, it's not moving positively at the top in all areas. However, looking more locally in the UAE, there is huge initiatives, which you've both sort of touched on, that are world-class and leading, in fact. So the Federal National Council in December 2018 announced that they were vacating 50% of the seats in the FNC to make them available to women. And that's now been executed this year. So now 50% of the Federal National Council are women, which is huge by world standards, let alone from the misconceptions of this part of the world. There's Strata out in Al Ain, the aerospace company that's almost run by all Emirati women, which is pretty impressive, and lots of other examples in the region of where there's some diversity at the top emerging.
And I've also heard about the ADGM initiative that's been launched quite recently. Can anybody speak to that, what the goals are and how they're progressing?
I can. I was in that roundtable. So it was an initiative to bring 50 or 60 people, not just women, together to discuss gender equality with an action focus, sort of not just discussing the themes, but trying to get some actionable outcomes and pulling it together as a white paper, which is what's being done at the moment, and it will be published. And yeah, that's the idea, is to be a voice of actionable change in the region and help facilitate it.
And I understand the ADGM is, all of this is working in tandem to reach the 2021 UAE vision of enhancing women's equality. So it seems like all of these agencies are actually putting together action plans and taking the steps to reach that vision.
Yes, definitely.
Great. So I want to turn to Raya. Raya, you've been working in the region on women's economic empowerment, but also looking at legal issues and knowing that there are countries where there are real challenges. I mean, the UAE may be special in this regard, but across many Middle Eastern countries, Arab countries, there's some real challenges in terms of implementation of these goals, even though the Constitution may provide equality to women. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like in some other places and some of the legal impediments you're seeing?
Yes. Thank you very much, Masuda. I think if we look at the UAE, of course, I mean, it's a leading example in terms of the changes that they've made towards gender equality, and my colleagues here have already said that in the panel. But if we look at the constitutions in most of the Arabic countries, if you look at them, you'll think like they do support gender equality, and one of the first provisions are usually refer to men and women are equal. But in reality, they're not in line with the other regulations or laws issued relating to women. So when you talk about the laws relating to domestic violence, when you talk about lack of provisions of sexual harassment, when you talk about inheritance, and so on. But what is, so this is definitely not in line with the constitution, so this is lacking. But then in the other Arabic countries, you do have the regulation protecting women, and you do have changes in the regulations in terms of provisions that support gender equality. But the implementation of it is a different story, because we still have women that are not educated enough, actually from both genders, are not educated enough in terms of their rights. There are not sufficient campaign. In many rural areas, still women give the application form for their husbands or brothers who are of a male guardian, that's what they call them, to apply for their IDs or passports. While legally, they can actually apply themselves. And it's the same with managing their money. I mean, managing your money is enshrined under the Sharia law, if we have to talk about the Sharia law. So a woman is entitled to her own money, entitled to keep her salary, entitled to her property. These are all her rights, but in many ways, we still lack the education and the implementation of these provisions. And that doesn't, we can't only look about the laws, we have to look in more details about the culture, the traditional barriers, but also the ongoing conflicts that's happening in the Arab world, which is setting women back dramatically in terms of their reaching their legal goals, and etc.
What's the kind of work, what kind of initiatives are ongoing, or can you speak to any that are working to address some of these challenges in these countries?
There are many ongoing organizations that are working in terms of women empowerment, women economic empowerment, but also checking the legal status of women in the Middle East. One of them is, of course, the UN Women, that's covering in almost of the regional Arab world. And then secondly, we have local organizations. So we have the women business organizations, we have women lawyers organization that are looking specifically, not like supporting women law, but specifically on the gender equality. And then we have like sort of the organization here in the UAE, the Gender Balance Organization. So we do have great initiatives, we do have support, but there is a lot of still cultural issues that we're dealing with. Security issues is a major blow to women because they're more vulnerable in ongoing conflicts and poverty and wars. So that's a major setback for organizations that are trying to help women reaching its goal where they should be. But there are definitely many initiatives in terms of, one of the successful initiatives is set out by the CEDAW Convention, where most of the countries are signatory to, with exception to a few Islamic countries that have set a reservation. And the CEDAW Convention is one of the most important conventions to eliminate gender discrimination.
I want to make sure to mention, I know you have started a Middle East lawyers group as well. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes. So we actually don't review the legal status of women, and that's not one of our main chapter. But we support women in the legal career. We have internship placements, we have trainings, we hold conferences twice a year, forums in other parts of the world, but also in the Middle East. to speak about women economic empowerment and the role of law. So how is the law supporting women in terms of economic empowerment? So that's what exactly we do.
Okay. So we've talked a little bit about gender diversity, and I'd like to sort of switch gears and talk about other kinds of diversity, since the UAE is a country with a population of 200 different nationalities. Expats make up about 80% of the population. So I'm wondering if anyone wants to take on this question of how does that diversity manifest in terms of growth in this country?
I think certainly from the standpoint of successful integration of both the national population and the expatriate population, the sort of collective certainly has driven that growth story. You know, I was talking earlier, and you can't separate the story of a place like the UAE if you try to remove one element of that. And the reality is that successful integration and inclusion of both multinational, multi-ethnic, and in particular recently the idea of being interfaith is the foundation also of how Abu Dhabi and the UAE has continued to grow. And it's actually becoming a beacon around integration and respect as a fundamental both right and expectation for those who come to reside here, peaceably, you know, collaborate and coordinate towards an aspired shared future. We talked about the Abrahamic family house, which is going to be happening on Sadiyat, and having a location where a synagogue and a church and a mosque or masjid is on a single site. That's a current manifestation of a long-held belief around inclusion and respect of interfaith. And of course, the papal visit earlier in the year, these are all milestones which during the year of tolerance are a reflection of the leadership of this country. And as an Emirati from Abu Dhabi, it makes me very proud that this has happened, obviously, within our city. But it doesn't happen by chance, right? We're all, everyone here in the audience, the fact that you have come to our home makes you part of our story, right? So, and I think that's really the fabric we hope to convey to all of you.
That's wonderful. I live in New York for most of the year, and I see it as one of the most diverse places in the world, and Dubai is my second home, and it feels just as diverse as New York, if not more so.
Alhamdulillah.
Shema, I wanted to ask you, as an entrepreneur here, you know, you talked about all the support you got and that women get here. Where do we go from here, both in the UAE and the region? What are the goals that you see that UAE should be striving for next in terms of women's economic empowerment, participation in the economy, entrepreneurship?
Personally, well, I see that UAE has done a great job in trying to give women their rights, far beyond a lot of countries that are far past us by years and years. Where I see we should be now focusing on is globally. I see a lot of women that have been successful, and now the second thing is to expand out of UAE and become a country that, instead of just importing goods, exporting whatever businesses we're creating. I think there's still more to be done on that level, because as you grow, it's really great that we support startups and we support sustainable companies, and I mean, this is all trending right now, but whereas I honestly see the support of going from step 2 to step 3, which is going global, expanding, making sure you know you've got the right partners on board, and taking what I think a lot of Emiratis and entrepreneurs have built that are UAE, in my opinion, brands that have occurred in UAE, and to start exporting to the world. And in this journey, I find it to be more the private sector supporting itself. I still think government can add a lot in respect to helping, especially startup entrepreneurs, to move ahead. Also, I find some laws internationally that are very different in entrepreneurship than in the UAE that I think can be looked at. We still don't have any bankruptcy laws within UAE government. We have different things that could be improved to get us on an international level. This has nothing to do between our diversity between male and female, but I think the next step is global, and we're here, and government companies and huge funds have moved, and now I think it's time for the young entrepreneurs to do the same.
Excellent. Anyone want to give some closing statement, since we have a couple minutes left?
I do want to mention about the bankruptcy law, that I think it's a very important aspect for women, actually for both, of course, genders. But in particular, women in the region, I mean, we have spoken to few, why do they not want to start their business? A lot of them are worried about starting their business and obtaining loans and having access to finance, and they know they could face harsher penalties if they could not pay their debts. This is a major setback because, I mean, this could be a myth, but there is a myth that says that women feel they will not take risk more than men in setting up their business. And having the risk of unpaid debt, especially when they have a family and they have kids, and they know they could, if they fail to pay that debt, they could face in prison in some of the Arab world. So we do have to improve the laws in terms of bankruptcy, for both genders, of course, but also in particular to make it easier for women to have access to finance, but also having better terms in terms of if they cannot pay their debts back.
Understood. Nabyl, I want to give you the last word here in terms of...
No problem, go ahead.
In terms of entrepreneurship, where do you see it heading? You know, the countries are already 10x what the rest of the world is. Where do you see it going from here?
So I think entrepreneurship is an interesting question, because when you think around the story of the UAE and in particular the region, as we shift away from natural resources as a primary sector contributing to both federal budgets, but more importantly the sustainability of the economic story, the idea of entrepreneurship as a mechanism to create jobs and that diversification, it's sort of integral to what has to happen in the longer term. The question becomes, what are the industries and what are the sectors that entrepreneurship is most inclusive of today? And I think that we have a good cross-section of that in a place like the UAE. Most people would have heard about it from something like Kareem and all these unicorns. The reality is that you don't need to be an outlier to have impact. And I would encourage everyone who is thinking around entrepreneurship, either from a risk perspective or from the simple adventure that it holds, incrementally you are building sort of cornerstones around a long-term diversified economy. And I don't think you need to be discouraged by the fact that you're not going to be a unicorn. Statistically, you won't. But I think the community service you provide by having opportunities to those in your peer group, that has an internal pride, which I have seen among my countrymen when they create something from here and it grows out. And that includes all of the expatriates who have come to the place like the UAE, whether it's in Dubai or in Abu Dhabi, and they become a beacon of the opportunity and success in a place like this. So I encourage you, entrepreneurship is absolutely a viable path forward, and we welcome, certainly in a place like the ADGM, who has the regulatory framework to adopt these things. There are very few places you will find that has an ecosystem of such support, both from incubation to acceleration. We absolutely are embracing and want to be participating with you in that journey. So thank you to ADGM also for sponsoring us here.
Yeah, with that, I'm going to thank ADGM, SALT, and all of the sponsors, including Mubadala, for such a wonderful conference and allowing us to hear from these panelists, these experts in the region. Thank you.